that regard, I'll introduce our second speaker. So our second speaker is Sohum Shah, and they're going to be reading a paper um, called Modern Yogic and Meditative Practices Taught by Gurudev Shree Chitrabhanu. Okay, so everybody please welcome Sohum.
Jai Hind, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Sohum Shah, and today I'm presenting my paper on the modern yogic and meditative practices as taught by Gurudev Shree Chitrabhanu Ji. So this presentation comes out of a paper that I wrote in spring of 2025, and it responds to a simple but kind of surprisingly underexplored academic gap. Gurudev Shree played a major role in popularizing Jain meditation in the West, and the specific structure of his meditative system and the practices that he taught are not really often analyzed as sort of a coherent method. So, over the next 20 minutes, I will try my best to take you through the core practices Gurudev Shree taught, focusing on how they translate Jain principles into modern dynamic meditative techniques. So my research explores the modern yogic and meditative practices and what makes Gurudev's approach distinct within the broader landscape of Jain yoga. And I think one of the key points here really is synthesis. Gurudev Shree is presenting something which is traditional in aim, be it liberation, inner purification, but modern in terms of language, method, and accessibility. So he draws on classical Jain categories of self-knowledge and ethical transformation, while also speaking directly to contemporary spiritual concerns, such as stress, emotional regulation, psychological healing, and inner peace. And I think this modernization is really particularly significant because if you go back in time, Gurudev Shree was teaching in the West during a broader cultural transition which emphasized self-actualization, authenticity, and inner potential, while increasingly focused on patterns of thought, emotional conditioning, and the restructuring of mental habits. And Gurudev's language often mirrors both of these movements. So he speaks of self-realization, he speaks of inner awakening in a way that resonates with humanistic psychology, but then he frames meditation as this systematic method for observing, for restructuring, and I guess for transforming one's thoughts patterns. And so in this sense, Gurudev appears to be building a bridge, right? So it's translating Jain meditative categories into a psychological vocabulary which modern Western seekers can understand, but still being distinctly Jain in its contemplative framework. And I guess the crux is that my argument isn't that Gurudev invented meditation in Jainism, but rather that he articulated a particular modern system, one with recognizable components, a clear pedagogical sequence, and consistent emphasis on experiential self-realization over ritualism. And I really want to bring this contrast clear, where experience is over ritual. And this really becomes important when we look at what Gurudev repeatedly frames as the real battleground, which is conquering the inner enemies, such as anger, ego, jealousy, greed. And the idea is for one to become a jina, a conqueror from the inside out. Gurudev authored a large body of work, and he covered over 25 books in both English and Gujarati, along with many recorded lectures. And so I approached this research really by analysing a lot of these primary texts and discourses, along with a few peer-reviewed secondary academic literature, and a small number of interviews I personally conducted with some of his closest and early followers, along with some direct correspondences with him when he was my family's personal guru. Gurudev Shree's most influential book centers on what he calls Jain meditation, and he coins this term JM. And it's presented really as this core technology for inner transformation and something that is so central to the path towards liberation. And the four primary books, which you can see on the slide, that really focus on these Jain meditation techniques, are seen as the 12 facets of reality, the psychology of enlightenment, 10 days journey into the self, and realize what you are. To give a brief but quick timeline of Gurudev Shree's life, he took renunciation at the humble age of 20 years old, and despite some resistance within the Jain community, he travelled overseas to attend the Geneva Spiritual Summit in Switzerland. Later, he was invited to the USA in 1971 to speak at Harvard School of Divinity, and he later went on to establish the Jain Meditation International Center in Manhattan. He peacefully passed away in April 2019 at the age of 96 years old. Now, Gurudev Shree's legacy is really closely tied to bringing Jain meditation and yoga to Western audiences in an accessible form, but also drawing on his own formative experiences of deep meditation in Mount Abu, which I guess is also where he was inspired to compose his famous hymn, the Bhāvanās. He's also frequently characterized as non-sectarian in orientation, where he was able to frame Jain principles as a spiritual path rather than a narrow identity boundary. And he continually emphasized reverence for all life, including being a strong advocate for veganism. And I think this universal framing is one of the reasons his methods travel so well across communities, including non-Jain practitioners, without losing their core Jain ethical and metaphysical aims. For Gurudev Shree, meditation is not escape, and it definitely is not merely relaxation. It is a disciplined method for turning the mind and perception inward, towards the self, in order to uncover what he describes as enlightened consciousness. And I kind of summarize this purpose in four overlapping aims on this slide here. First is the idea of guiding inwards. You're directing your attention away from your surface identity into deeper awareness. The second is around achieving peace, releasing tension and stress so that mental blockages clear and clarity becomes possible. And the third, of course, is daily integration. So meditation isn't something you do one time, it's meant to transform the way you live. And I guess the fourth, and probably the most important, is the idea of transcending the ego, to connect with the higher self, being in a mode of being that is less reactive and less conditioned. And I guess the practical psychology of this really can be summarized as meditation helping to quiet mental chatter, ceasing clinging to the past and stop fantasizing about the future. And the idea is to create space for genuine experience of reality and clarity of thinking. And when you place this within the framework of broader, engaged Jain studies, we can see how his meditation is directly ethical. It's really aimed at changing how anger arises, how pride forms, how greed itself rationalizes, and how compassion and equanimity can become stable dispositions. And the idea is that meditation becomes a way of making ahimsa and self-restraint internal, not just a social or ritualistic thing. So now that we have this purpose in place, we can sort of explore Gurudev Shree's unique synthesis of practices that are really spiritually grounded, but modern. I group these practices into three main clusters. The first is the idea of bhāvanās meditations, which are centered on reflective contemplations, essentially the 12 reflections in Jainism. The second is mantra meditations, where using sacred sounds and meaningful phrases can help to stabilize attention and reshape inner tendencies. The third is chakra meditations, where you're working with the 7 energy centers as a map of consciousness and inner life force. And in addition to these, he teaches several techniques that read sort of psychologically intuitive to many contemporary practices we know now. So he has a 3-step inquiry method, self-healing visualization, inner embodiment practices, and also structured breath awareness that we'll go on to. So from here onwards, I will walk us through each of these methods as a coherent toolkit aimed at one goal: inner transformation through direct experience of the self. The practice of the 12 reflections, the bhāvanās, which in classical Jain contexts are often called anuprekshas, meaning sustained contemplation, traditionally function to prevent karmic influx and cultivate detachment and equanimity. And this is part of preparing the mind for deeper meditation. What Gurudev Shree does is reinterpret the tone and the framing. So instead of only emphasizing negation, he offers this modern vision that speaks to both Jain and non-Jains. And you can see on the slide some of these reflections, such as seeing the change beneath the changes, the nature of the universe, freedom from dependency, and contemplating on these really helps to explicitly focus on positive bhāvanās that function almost like an ethics of inner life. So you have amity, appreciative joy, compassion, and equanimity. Gurudev Shree also provides what he calls seed thoughts for meditation, and these sort of act like catalysts, allowing one to dive deeper into the topic of reflection with a starting thought. And one of these powerful examples that I really like is what he calls a rare occasion, and it reads, "I do not possess knowledge, I am knowledge. Removing the veils, I am revealing myself. When I confuse the desires of body with the longing of soul, I don't see what love is. Love is the nourishment of the soul. It is to just be and not to possess. It is to be in communion. Let me celebrate the unique moment when I realize that I am eternal, unborn, and imperishable. When I experience this rare inner treasure, this will be my greatest achievement." This beautiful reflection is really a clear example of how Gurudev Shree shifts Jain contemplative practices into this modern language where you have dignity, clarity, and a lot of spiritual confidence while still maintaining that depth of Jain metaphysics. And Gurudev is still rooted in this Jain view that the soul is inherently pure and luminous, but he approaches it through a different approach, through awakening, through remembrance. Mantra meditation is really another core pillar for Gurudev. These are sacred sounds and words with meaning and energy. And just like how a banana given to a monkey calms them down, if the mind is busy holding something simple and rhythmic like a mantra, it naturally becomes calmer, less scattered, and in essence more capable of one-pointedness. And I've got 3 examples on this slide here, the first being ṇamo arihantāṇaṃ, which Gurudev teaches not only as devotion, but almost as like a moral psychology. So really you can understand this as bowing before those who have conquered their inner enemies in order to conquer one's own inner enemies. And the point is that the arihant is not only a figure of worship, but a mirror of what inner victory looks like, which is freedom from vices and passions. The second is vīruṃ, meaning brave amongst the brave. And Gurudev Shree teaches this as a way to charge the mind with courage and to meet life's challenges with fear. And you can directly integrate this with the breath. So you would inhale and mentally feel V, and exhale and mentally say Ram. And the idea is that the sound, the body, and the attention are all in synchronized movement. The third mantra I have here is Rim. And this is a seed sound traditionally associated with awakening and uplifting inner energy. And of course, in the Jain context, is the seat of the 24 Tirthankaras. So across all these examples, Gurudev uses mantra not only as a method of concentration, but this idea of there being a discipline for unlocking the inner mind. Meditation on the 7 energy centers of the chakras is one of the most recognizable features, I would say, of Gurudev's modern teaching system. And it's amazingly interesting here what he does to intentionally integrate what is not historically part of classical Jain yoga or meditation, but from the Tantric Hatha framework into a modern Jain context. So rather than presenting this as sort of an esoteric anatomy, Gurudev reframes the seven centers as these progressive levels of consciousness. And the idea is that you emphasize visualizations and these gradual cultivations, moving through each center in turn as part of a disciplined inner training. And you can kind of see here on the slides the progression from the base chakra to the crown, which is paired with emotions, visualizations, and elements as well. The three-step method is one of the clearest examples of Gurudev's modern teaching techniques. It is pretty structured, very memorable, and very direct. And he uses three short mantras as this progressive inquiry into identity, where he's moving from the surface self-definitions towards a deeper recognition of who the self is. So the first step is kohum, meditating on who am I. And I guess the point here isn't really to answer this quickly, but almost have this courageous confrontation with oneself. Probe at what your hidden tendencies are and what your instinctive identifications may be. Step 2 would be meditating on the word nahum, meaning I am not that. And the idea is that when the mind offers identity statements like I am my body, I am my emotions, or I am my social role, etc., the idea is to peel away all of these roles, all of these labels, which are not actually the true self, and practice this disidentification. And the idea here is that you're reducing the power of conditioning, labels, inherited narratives that normally have such a strong control and grip over the mind. And the third step is Sohum, meaning I am that. And this is presented as a movement towards the true self. Ideally, a move towards what is this permanent reality, what remains beneath all of our changing forms. And in Jain terms, this resonates with the distinction between Jiv and Ajiv. And so the idea with each of these practically is to inhale the first syllable and exhale the second. So you would inhale go and exhale hum. Inhale so, exhale hum. And you can do that across all three of these words. And from a modern perspective, this is really a form of analytical meditation. It doesn't necessarily ask you to believe anything at first. It's really more about investigating your experience. And the idea is that through this investigation, you are able to loosen your ego-based identities and access a steadier inner awareness. This slide explores another one of Gurudev's methods, which is around a 4-step journey, which is used to describe a movement from external supports towards pure inner experience. So the first is Padastha Dhyan, which is concentration on sacred words or mantras, such as ṇamo arihantāṇaṃ. And the idea is to use this mantra and its repetition to settle into a peaceful presence, and you feel this peaceful presence of the divine. The second is Rupastha Dhyan, and the idea is that you visualize a serene form, perhaps the arihantas, the siddh bhagwans, and you are meant to try and absorb their qualities of stillness and peace onto yourself. The third level would be Bindastha Dhyan, where you are internalizing the divine presence within. And so the idea is that the body becomes this living temples, and all of the sort of visualizations of the divine that you would have had in this previous step start becoming part of you. And the fourth and last step in the sequence is Rupati Dhyan, where you are moving beyond words and images into equanimity itself. And the idea is a practitioner tastes freedom from clinging and aversion, experiencing this pure awareness. And I really like this method because Gurudev doesn't dismiss external supports, he doesn't dismiss mantras, he doesn't dismiss visualizations in this method, but in fact uses them as a guide to eventually go beyond them altogether. Another
So,
practice that
Sohum,
speaks.
Sohum, I just want to let you know that your time's up, so if you wrap it up in about 30 seconds, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely no problems at all. I will jump over to the conclusion, which really explains how Gurudev's teachings present a very clear synthesis of ancient Jain meditative wisdom with a modern sensibility rooted in lived experience, accessibility, and psychological insight. And his system is really not this mechanical ritual, and it's not vague mysticism, but it's really this embodied path to self awareness, healing, and spiritual revelations. I would like to just end with a quote in Gurudev Shree's own words. To know who knows is meditation. Meditation is not a temporary comfort. It is to reach the last point, to know who knows. Jai Jain, and thank you for listening.